The rise of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie series is a fascinating success story. In the year of its release, it had everything going against it. An atrocious initial design for Sonic that even late-night talk show hosts mocked, a global pandemic on the horizon that would shut down theaters worldwide, and a legendary video game franchise going through what would be its longest drought between mainline titles. But while the collective Sonic fanbase was initially pissed off at this unnecessary redesign of their favorite character, this trailer was surreal for me. I remember while watching it, my heart was pounding at my office desk, not just because one of my all-time favorite video game franchises was finally on the big screen, but because this trailer was set to Coolio's Gangster's Paradise. Humor me on a very short story here. Back in 2006, I was just a teenage Sonic fan messing around with Windows Movie Maker, posting fan videos and AMVs on YouTube, and I'd come up with a throwaway name for my account based on a character from Adult Swim's Harvey Birdman at that time, and the TheMentok channel was born. Little did I know, my AMV spawned from a combined love of Sonic and 90s hip-hop would 12 years later be the anthem for the first trailer of the Sonic movie. It was like watching my own teenage mind come to life. So it wasn't long before people found my video and my little channel started to grow. I also made a fake trailer in 2007 for the Sonic movie I dreamed of seeing. Clips stitched together from Sonic games and Sonic X, imagining what a proper movie would look like. That project was one of my proudest creations back in high school. And it's just wild to think that I have actual movies that I can go watch now. So when I say that the Sonic the Hedgehog movie trilogy means a lot to me, it's not just as a Sonic fan, it's far more personal. These movies didn't just make waves in theaters, it helped me find my voice as a creator. That's why I want to take a step back and explore the long, winding history of the Sonic movie, how Jeff Fowler and his team overcame incredible odds, and how this series became a phenomenon against all expectations. And by the way, if you like me or any of my videos, a single click on the like button or subscribe goes such a long way. Now let's take a deeper look at the Sonic the Hedgehog movie series.
Gotta go fast.
The idea for a Sonic the Hedgehog movie goes back much further than most would believe. I'm talking 1993. Around the time where Sonic was already a cultural phenomenon in the Western market, rivaling the popularity of Nintendo's Super Mario. Enter Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic's very first cartoon produced by Deke Entertainment. If you grew up in the 90s, I'm sure the intro to this show is one of your earliest memories. It was a series of one-off episodes detailing the wacky hijinks of Sonic the Hedgehog and his buddy Tails, thwarting the plans of the nefarious Dr. Ivo Robotnik and his minions. Negotiations to help license Sonic to Deke Entertainment for Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog was headed up by the consumer products director at Sega of America at the time, Mickalene Risley. She wanted to take this type of licensing a step further and began talks with several producers in Hollywood to bring Sonic to the big screen. This was definitely a risk, considering both the Super Mario Bros. And Street Fighter films in that era were commercial failures.
You have made me a happy man.
Next, I'll make you a dead one. Yeah!
And I'd argue Hollywood executives at that time weren't really in tune with video games enough to pull off proper adaptations. Despite their competitors failing in Hollywood, Sega of America was in good spirits, and in 1994, they closed a deal with MGM and Trilogy Entertainment Group for a Sonic movie, working with Penn Densham, known for producing Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Sega was insistent that whatever film they came up with would incorporate the Sonic origin story drafted by the development team of the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. Mentok, what origin story are you talking about? I thought Sonic just went fast and saved animals from Dr. Robotnik. Well, I'm glad you asked. They wanted to include elements of an origin story drafted by Sega about a writer of children's books named Mary Garnett, whose husband was a test pilot for the Air Force in his plane called the Blue Gale, with the nickname Hedgehog because of his helmet hair. Well, it turns out poor Hedgehog here died in 1947 in an attempt to be the first to break the sound barrier, and his fatal test flight would be lost to the history books. His wife would base a Hedgehog character after him named Sonic, who protected innocents from evil men. Yeah, I know, it sounds like a rejected episode of The Twilight Zone, but Sega wanted this backstory in the movie. However, the first draft of this movie would be completely different. It would have had Sonic reimagined as a teenage boy named Ginny Hedgeman, who was able to transform into Sonic the Hedgehog after gaining powers from a lab accident. On the flip side was one Dr. Paul Ellison, a mad scientist who specialized in mutant creations, and would have eventually be nicknamed Robotnik. The movie was going to be live action, and it would have leaned into animatronics and CGI to tell the story, but this outline was abandoned with Sega wanting to go in a different direction. Sega and MGM would bring in Richard Jefferies as a writer, who worked with Micheline Risley during her time at Marvel Comics, and would go on to be the screenwriter for 2010's Tron Legacy. But this guy Jefferies was tasked with writing another draft, and ended up submitting Sonic, Wonders of the World, an 8-page outline. And this version told the story of 12-year-old Josh Pinsky, who during an intense play session with Sonic Extreme for the Sega Saturn, manages to have Sonic enter the real world. But Dr. Robotnik manages to escape from the game as well, which leads to a movie having Sonic and Josh having to work together to stop Robotnik from digitizing the wonders of the world. But once again, this outline left Sega as a whole uneasy about the direction of the film, and would attempt to push back to revert to the pilot origin story I mentioned earlier. As a result, MGM pulled out from the project, with Pandenshem saying, quote, "I pulled us out of the project when I realized that Sega wanted to hold on to the original developer's origin story, which I could not see working in a film structure. And they didn't want to insult the game developer by letting us work out a more feature-friendly approach." Interesting to see Sega was so pro-developer at that time. That's kind of ahead of the game here. So Richard Jefferies did try to pitch his draft to DreamWorks instead, but they turned it down due to the high cost of the Sonic license, and that would close the book on the Sonic movie project for some time. In the late 90s, Ben Hurst, the writer of the cult favorite Sonic the Hedgehog animated series, pitched a movie as well to tie up the series' storyline. But in comes Ken Penders, lead writer of the Sonic Archie comics, who, instead of letting Hurst continue, ran to Sega to complain, and then pitched his own movie idea a few years later called Sonic Armageddon. And yeah, as you can imagine, both projects were scrapped. If I went to all of the Ken Penders drama, we'd be here for hours, maybe even days. Let's just say it's a saga of ego, lawsuits, and what were they thinking type moments, but maybe we'll cover that some other time. In early 1996, Studio Pierrot, the folks that would go on to animate Naruto, produced the Sonic the Hedgehog original video animation, or Sonic OVA, in Japan, which was later marketed as Sonic the Hedgehog the movie in the US. But it wasn't released stateside until 1999, coinciding with the launch of Sonic Adventure for the Dreamcast, though the two are entirely unrelated. While I won't delve too deeply into this animation in this video, it's worth mentioning because it offers a fresh and unique take on Sonic, separate from all other continuities. It's funny, action-packed, and features Knuckles wearing the Australian Akubra hat, a detail that even got a nod in this spin-off TV series, much to the delight of longtime fans. Or maybe it was just me. Here's a story for you. I once made a full review of this OVA for my channel, but it got DMCA'd. Ironically, you can now watch the whole animation on YouTube, so clearly someone just had it out for me.
I think we're playing.
More time passed, but finally a savior would pick up the Sonic movie, Sony Pictures Entertainment. They managed to acquire the rights to produce the film, and by 2014, a live-action animated film was announced, with Sony bringing in Marza Animation Planet, the CG studio known for several CGI cutscenes in Sonic games up to that point in time. Fast and Furious producer Neil Moritz joined the roster alongside comedy writers Evan Susser and Van Robichaud.
It's pronounced Robichaud. I'm getting tired of correcting your dumbass.
By 2016, Sega announced Tim Miller, director of the hit movie Deadpool, and Jeff Fowler, an animator and junior director, would be joining this project. This wasn't Fowler's first foray with Sonic, as he was one of the directors for the opening cutscene for Shadow the Hedgehog back in 2005. Despite Sony's hit-or-miss film production, this roster had proven to make blockbuster hits, and it was promising that the Sonic film would finally get off the ground. With an estimated release year of 2018, the team moved full speed ahead. But once again, the film would get stuck in development hell, and Sony would not be our savior after all. Until Paramount Pictures and its beautiful mountain logo would step in and acquire the rights to the film and finally get this movie over the finish line. With the original film team intact, production would continue under the working title Casino Night, with the plot written to focus on the origins of Sonic and Dr. Robotnik. Pat Casey and Josh Miller, comedy writers behind bangers like National Lampoon Presents Dorm Days and Hey, Stop Stabbing Me, would join to write the script. Casey and Miller initially pitched to Jeff Fowler, now the director of the film, a plotline based on the games. Chaos Emeralds would have somehow ended up on Earth in South America, causing the animal life in the area to mutate. This would be the origin of the anthropomorphic species in the jungles of South America, with Sonic being the protector who kept humans away and the other animals safe. Eggman, on the other hand, was written to find this hideaway and initially defeat Sonic, stealing the emeralds for himself. And this would have led into the plot of Sonic heading to the US to find the emeralds. It's not a bad outline overall, and they would pitch this idea to Sega, who received it positively, but interestingly enough, there was a caveat on their end. It was against their rules for the Sonic universe. They insisted that Sonic had to come from another world, not from Earth.
And so anyway, we sort of pitched that, and Sega was like, "Oh, we like it, but we can't do it. Like that's against like Sega rules. Like Sonic has to come from another world. Like he can't just be from a part of Earth." And
so with this in mind, Pat Casey felt it best if he was just from another planet. Meanwhile, Jeff Fowler pitched a separate plot, with Sonic being a kid who wasn't allowed to run, but would discover a way to travel to another world. There, he would sneak out to run free, but would run into Dr. Robotnik, and the plot would have played out from there. Elements of this idea would be sprinkled into the final movie pitch, written to be similar to a buddy cop film, with Sonic, an alien who flees to Earth from another planet as a young child, after his power is pursued by a mysterious group of enemies. And eventually would be found by a small-town cop, which kickstarts their adventure to help Sonic escape the pursuit of Dr. Robotnik. Initially, when the project was under Sony, they wanted the writers to create original characters that they would own instead of Sega. Classic Sony. But through this suggestion, Rava the Destroyer was born.
who?
Yeah, this would have been some lizard enemy who would have attempted to steal Sonic's power. But thankfully, this character was cut from the script as they felt too many characters were introduced in the plot, and wanted to keep the attention on Robotnik instead. Tails and Knuckles would also be cut from the plot early on as well for similar reasons, avoiding overwhelming general audiences with too much Sonic mythology. Ultimately, they decided it would have a larger effect if they introduced them in a sequel, and instead opted to tease Tails in the post-credit scenes of the first movie. Still, there was a new character that was introduced as Sonic's parental figure, Longclaw, an owl that would raise Sonic as a child growing up on his planet, and protect him from those who would seek out his power. Longclaw was a part of Jeff Fowler's initial pitch for the film, originally being an old man owl, but Casey and Miller would shift it to a female owl instead. And while it's not confirmed where the inspiration came from for Longclaw, there are a couple of theories on this. One being the one-off old man owl character from the Sonic OVA I mentioned earlier.
The president
Serves as a goofy, knowledgeable elder character during the events of that film. Others have pointed out owl symbols in Labyrinth Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 1 that could have sparked inspiration for the character. Personally, I believe this theory is a coincidence, and Fowler most likely watched the Sonic the Hedgehog OVA for inspiration before coming up with his own ideas. The final cut of the film would begin with a quick intro act depicting how Sonic escapes to Earth, with Longclaw sacrificing herself to fend off their enemies while Sonic uses special rings to warp to planets. Fun fact, we now know that this rival tribe were the Echidnas, fully revealed in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. But initially, these would be the Lizards, led by Rava the Destroyer, eventually replaced by the Echidnas to be closer to the games. Which brings me to Sonic's rings. Rings are still pretty mysterious overall in the lore of the games themselves. I have a video that talks more about it if you want to check that out. But initially, rings were going to be absent from this film entirely. But as Pat Casey talked about working on the film to the average Joe, they would always mention Sonic collecting rings, which made them realize that they should pivot from the focus on Chaos Emeralds to rings instead, which is introduced in the movie as a method of warp transportation for Sonic if he ever needs to escape to another planet. And this is based on those giant rings from Sonic 1 that transport you into the bonus stage if you've collected enough rings within the level. Finally, there's the character of Tom Wachowski. Initially, the studio told Casey and Miller that Sonic had to partner up with a human kid, which pretty much sounds like the pitch from the 90s, and Chris Thorndike from 2003's Sonic X. Thankfully, Casey and Miller would approach Tim Miller about changing the idea of Sonic teaming up with a child, to which he agreed.
It'll be Sonic and a kid or a group of kids. And then we came up with a whole story for that, but then we were also like, what's the point of these fucking kids? We showed it to Tim Miller,
So,
director of Deadpool, and he's like, I hate these kids. What's the point? And we were like, yeah, you're right. They suck.
And so, Tom Wachowski was born, a lazy small-town cop that didn't take his life too seriously.
The original idea was that he's a small-town cop. People are like, you should do more with your life. And he's like, why? Why should I? And he just goes around driving drunk people home and like shooing skaters away from the library, but like not really. And he'll be like, let me borrow that board for a second, and then tries a kickflip and falls down or whatever. And like that's more what he was like.
The point was to have the events of the movie inspire Tom to do more with his life, which made the final script, but the lazy part of his personality was toned down a bit. So now we had our lead duo, with Sonic meeting Tom and enlisting his help to find his lost ring so he can leave Earth after being pursued by Dr. Robotnik. Funny enough, Sega pushed back on the idea of Sonic asking Tom for help during the movie, citing that Sonic typically wouldn't want his help, but the writers insisted, saying they needed Sonic to do that to ensure the story progressed and for overall character growth. As for Dr. Eggman, we'll get to him shortly. With a proper plot fleshed out and our characters decided, now it was time to find some star actors to take the stage and make this movie a smash hit.
It's me, Mario.
Yes, Chris Pratt was considered for both the role of Sonic and Tom before he got that Mario gig. They even based key concept art with Chris Pratt in mind. There are a few others considered for the role of Sonic, like Tom Holland for instance, and for Tom Wachowski, aside from Chris Pratt, Paul Rudd was also taken into consideration. Enter one Ben Schwartz, comedian and voice actor starring in roles like Leonardo from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and John Ralphio in Parks and Recreation. He was brought in to record a test scene with Sonic to sell the movie to the studio depicting Sonic and Tom playing with his radar gun as a game, with Sonic running by Tom's cop car so fast it would send it into a ditch. But he'd end up keeping the role after both Jeff Fowler and Tim Miller enjoyed his interpretation of the character. On the other hand, James Marsden would secure the role of Tom Wachowski. But there was one last important character they needed to make sure that they nailed. Sonic's arch nemesis, Dr. Eggman. The script would lean heavily into his origins, an early look at Dr. Robotnik before his transition into the eccentric mad scientist that we see in later movies. Casey and Miller chose the name Dr. Robotnik to align with the character's actual name, and then have Sonic give him the title of Eggman later on in the film. Very similarly to the way Sega merged the original Japanese name Dr. Eggman with his American one by having Sonic seemingly poke fun at him in Sonic Adventure.
Whatever you say, Eggman. Enough!
There was an extensive deliberation regarding what type of Dr. Robotnik they wanted to introduce in this film, and debated between portraying him as a comedic character or a more serious antagonist for Sonic. They originally wrote several jokes for Dr. Robotnik to deliver, but throughout the early phases were told to take many of them out, with the fear that he would come off too silly. But then, they found their actor.
Dr. Robotnik. But my dentist calls me Rob.
So as you can imagine, once Jim Carrey was on board, Casey and Miller got the green light to put all the cut jokes back in. Carrey would of course make the character his own and pitch different ideas for new lines and delivery to make his role shine. And I've always respected how invested Jim Carrey gets into his roles. And after seeing him speak about Robotnik as a character and the inspiration on how he wanted to depict him, I was sold.
The wonderful thing about Robotnik is he is analogous to a lot of the insane ego that's running us, in all different kinds of realms of life. He hates society because he wasn't nurtured, he wasn't loved, and this is what happens to a genius like that when they have no nurturing, no love, no guidance, and that's what he's become, the epitome of that. He hates the world because the world abandoned him.
He's since embraced the hell out of this character and has considerably evolved it with each movie, now being what I think is a believable full-on Eggman. Finally, the design and visual effects team was assembled with Marza Animation Planet, Blur Studio, and Moving Picture Company, coming together for all the animations and visual effects. Everything was in place to make this a blockbuster movie, and after delays and what seemed like decades of flirting with the idea of a Sonic movie, it was finally time to reveal it to the world for a November 2019 release date.
SFPD!
Meow?
Well yeah, you guys know what happened here. April 2019, D-Day for this movie. The details still seem pretty vague on how this design choice was made, but several people working on this project must have greenlit this. If you look back on concept art, there were several options that seemed to be considered and tested out before the team landed on this one. The backlash was so immense. Sonic breached the normie world with people who had not even thought about Sonic in probably the last decade before that, and from my personal perspective here, I see what went wrong. They attempted to make a more realistic design to go with the setting of the movie, and all of the charm from what made Sonic was just lacking, and had viewers feel an uncanny valley feeling just looking at it. The eyes were too small, the mouth was too human, and the fur itself seemed like it belonged on some cheap, furry Halloween costume. Also, these bare hands, yuck. This design even took the original creators and developers of Sonic by surprise, with Naoto Oshima, the original designer of Sonic, saying, "Sonic is a fairy-like hedgehog, so it's not necessary to make him like a hedgehog when it comes to live action. Mickey would not become mouse-like even if he's in a live-action picture, because they are fairies who continue existing if everyone believes in them." To be fair, this design doesn't look like a realistic hedgehog at all, but I get his point. Also, I never thought about this. In these movies, why does Sonic have the name of an Earth animal if he's from another planet? Are hedgehogs a galactic species? Are they related at all to these hedgehogs? Why do they all speak English?
Shut up!
But back to this design. So in a very rare decision, just 5 days later from the trailer release, Jeff Fowler put out this tweet. Thank you for the support and the criticism. The message is loud and clear. You aren't happy with the design and you want changes. It's going to happen. Everyone at Paramount and Sega are fully committed to making this character the best he can be. Hashtag Sonic movie, hashtag gotta fix fast. And to ensure they got this down, they brought in Sonic art aficionado Tyson Hesse, known early on in his life for fan comics that introduced major characters like Nipples the Enchilada. But more recently, he helped out with artwork in the Sonic Archie comics, animation and concept art for projects like Sonic Mania, including animations based off of that game. And he's gone on to be one of the major artistic consultants for various Sonic-related projects. And to Paramount's team, he submitted this, the beginning of a rebirth for Sonic. With the movie already filmed, the team was confident they could pull off the redesign in a shorter time frame, having everything they needed on their Sonic model to make it happen. With that, the movie was delayed to February 14th, 2020. Fan site Sonic Team Argentina reportedly contacted an animator who worked through the redesign process, who stated that Paramount knew that fans wouldn't like it and powered through the decision, assuming it would have been accepted by general audiences. But after the backlash, the production team had a long meeting with Sega, and boy would I have loved to have been a fly on that wall. But that's when they made the call to change the design and delay the film, adding an extra $5 million to the budget. The redesign lasted 5 months with no crunch time from the team, as the movie was mostly ready. While this source seems trustworthy enough, the original interview has since been taken down from Sonic Team Argentina, but the account seems to line up with the other accounts the production team has given in interviews.
You know, it was a lot of little things. I mean, obviously we were designing Sonic for a live action environment that's never been done before, and so we had to give him a lot of detail that he'd never been sort of seen previously in games. So it was definitely a very unique challenge, but yeah, really excited with where we ended up, and love that fans love it as much as they do.
And on November 12, 2019, the week of the original release date, a new trailer was shared with the world.
Oh my god, I'm so happy. I'm so happy. 203,000 likes versus 2,000 dislikes.
Man, that guy looked pretty excited. And I just realized we never got this scene. What gives, man? The redesign was received warmly, and though there was some dissent that this movie would still suck ass,
those people will never be happy with anything.
Fowler and his team won the trust of fans with this design that was not only closer to the games, but charming in its own right. Almost cute. There's a mix between cool and the more delinquent, kiddish vibe they were going with for his movie personality. But of course, came the conspiracy theories that this was all a marketing ploy to get more people to watch the movie. But between the concept art, the already developed merchandise with the old design, the test animations, the storyboards, the promotional artwork, the apologies from the director, the documented extra time put into it, documented test screenings in Brazil, and the hiring of Tyson Hesse, need I say more? Either way, February 2020 came around, and despite all of the commotion around the film, butts were definitely in seats, with this film grossing $149 million in North America, making it the 6th highest grossing film of 2020. And while critics gave it pretty mixed reviews, the audience reception said otherwise. The film was an established blockbuster and a big step for video game movie adaptations, which for many years were thought to be cursed. Though Detective Pikachu, which predated this film, was considered to be a good movie in its own right, Sonic proved that wasn't just a fluke. Video games could be done in the movies. And then,
everybody cough in my face! Do it!
This was one of the last films many Americans saw in theaters before the pandemic hit in 2020. While you could argue its February release helped it avoid a significant box office hit, there's one key factor to consider: China. By February 2020, China was already under strict lockdowns, forcing the film's release there to be postponed to July 31st. And by the time it finally premiered, the momentum had already slowed, and the impact was diminished. It's fascinating to think about the what if. Could this movie have made an even bigger splash if not for COVID? Even so, it performed well enough to greenlight a sequel, with the production team feeling much more confident in their audience, cast, design, and the direction of the Sonic cinematic universe. And with each new movie release, the team would bring on even more star power, like Idris Elba as Knuckles, or Keanu Reeves as Shadow. Deeper connections to the games were introduced, a spin-off series for Knuckles after the second movie, and most impressively, they got Jim Carrey to come back 2 more times to reprise his role as Dr. Eggman, despite rumors of retirement. I feel like there's more to uncover about the sequels, and I'd love to dive a little bit deeper, so let me know if you'd like a follow-up. Let's call it at around 1,000 likes. But Sonic the Hedgehog has proved to be one of the most successful video game characters to be adapted into a film, collectively netting $1 billion at the time of this video across all 3 movies. And with Sonic 4 greenlit before even the release of Sonic 3, I'm excited to see where Sonic goes next. So let's hear your theories in the comments below.